We are the third owners of Molly, our Cornish Crabber 26, and up until we bought her, she had been based around Falmouth in the west of Cornwall. When we took her over, she was ashore at a yard in Penryn, a quiet tributary upstream from Falmouth. I used the time until launch to learn as much about her systems as I could. I'd decided I would not make any changes to her equipment and sail her exactly as she was for the first season. It soon came to the exciting moment to rig her up, ready for launch. The rigging on Molly was similar to our previous boat, a 19-foot Cape Cutter, just bigger. I learned a few lessons there. For example, this staysail wouldn't furl properly because I'd wound it the wrong way, and I had no end of trouble before I noticed that the UV strip was on the inside when furled. Molly's overall condition was great, except for the mast, which we could see was not in great shape, with a lot of discolouring where the Sickens wood treatment had not been maintained. However, as you can see, there was not enough space between the boats in the yard to drop the mast, which would have overhung the road. So that can of worms wasn't opened until later in the season. "Are you ready?" the yard foreman asked an hour before our pre-booked launch slot. Luckily we were, and so began our adventures aboard Molly of Mylor. After all the checking and fettling, we would finally get to go afloat. Her previous owner could not resist coming to watch. I think he was more than a little bit sad to pass her on. I'd booked the earliest possible date, but we had to wait until several other boats had been launched before Molly could be moved from her spot at the very top of the yard. Even so, it still felt like we were in front of the game, with so many other boats still ashore. Molly was quickly and efficiently lifted off the cradle on which she'd stood all winter and trundled down to the water, first by tractor and Rudberg trailer, the same type our own club used for launch and recovery. She was then carried smoothly in the straps of the boat hoist down to the water. Whenever I've launched boats, I always have an irrational fear that it's going to sink, even though all the seacocks are safely closed. I had to remind myself that although this was a first for us, it was very much a routine task for the crew at the yard. The whole process was reassuringly uneventful, and she was soon warped onto a pontoon, and I jumped aboard to find no water gushing in. I opened the seacocks and I started the engine for the first time. Nicky and I were joined by long-time boating friend and fellow Cornish Crabber owner Russell. He was coming along to help us get used to manoeuvring Molly under engine, the main thing that I was worried about when we bought her. Our previous boat had been much smaller and lighter and was very manoeuvrable with its outboard. We were greeted on the water by another Cornish Crabber 26, which turned out to be helmed by Peter Thomas, the MD of Cornish Crabbers, who had kindly helped us out by delivering our new carbon fibre luff spar. Brand new, yeah. Did you? Ah, thank you. Nicky and I chose Fowey for our first proper passage in Molly. After an uneventful motor sail up from Falmouth, we picked up a mooring opposite the town, inflated Aurelia and rowed across for dinner at the Ship Inn, a fine fish pie and some rather gritty Camel Estuary mussels. We passed 2 rather rolly nights and enjoyed the carnival atmosphere of the town and some lovely food aboard. We set off the following morning to return to Falmouth with a lovely southerly and set a cracking pace, close hauled, expecting to bear away after the Dodman and arrive back early enough to anchor somewhere for lunch. However, the wind swung inexorably to the west and we ended up in a light air beat with engine assistance. And sadly Nicky had to return home that evening, but we were really pleased with our first proper expedition on Molly. With Nicky's holiday time run out, Ben joined me aboard for another longer passage, this time to Plymouth. We had a very slow start with very little wind and I was able to sit in the cockpit chopping veg to make our evening meal. After an hour or two though, it was like someone switched on the wind and cockpit cooking abruptly became very tricky. Molly picked up her skirts, heeled over and flew along. I was discovering that Molly had a great deal of weather helm, even in a force 3. When the wind reached force 4, I had to dump so much of the main that it hardly seemed to be driving. This seemed quite a modest wind speed to put in a reef, which I was struggling to do anyway, so I felt that I still had a lot to learn about making her go well. I later learned through the excellent Crabber forum to check the mast rake and discovered it was raked a very long way back. When I adjusted it nearer to vertical later in the season, this helped enormously. This wasn't a trivial task though and required some rigging extenders for the 2 pairs of shrouds. We entered Plymouth Sound in the early evening, very familiar waters from my many scuba diving trips here, passed the breakwater and went through the lock into Sutton Marina. We shared the chilli I'd made earlier with my daughter Amy, studying in Plymouth, and then she took us out for a drink at one of the waterside bars on the Hoe. Ben needed to get back to Falmouth, so in the morning he took the train home and I had some solo time. I chose to visit the Yelm estuary for the day, a beautiful place, and spent the day anchored in the sun before motoring up the river to pick up a mooring. The following day I had my first longish solo passage and romped downwind back to Falmouth, where I left Molly with a little trepidation at Mylor, ready for our next adventure, which would be to bring her back home to the Solent. leaving the boat. So hatch closed, cushions up in the saloon here, dehumidifiers refreshed, 2 of them, duvet in the dry bag, swept up. Everything's off on the panel. The cock in there is closed. All of the sea cocks are closed. Bilge pump is on auto. Toilet is pumped out and locked closed. Toilet, sink, cock is shut. All good. Let's put the washboards in. Looking a bit sad. I need a fresh coat of varnish. That's a job to be done soon. Putting those in. Padlocks on the lockers. Tillers lashed. Lockers are padlocked, apart from the one that the bolts and fenders are going in. And then slide the hatch shut after a lovely fortnight's holiday aboard Molly. We're all locked. Everything's neat and tidy on deck. Colours are on. Bowsprit steeved. Everything's lashed and secure. Spray hoods up again. Fixed. All nice. There we go, stepping off. Molly of Mylor. Got exhaust on there. Hull's looking pretty clean. Bow fender on, just in case. She's ready for the mooring. Bye bye Molly. See you in a couple of weeks.